I am involved in regenerative design within Transition Network as well, and looking at how we can develop regenerative design skills within the transition movement. And this has got me super interested over the last few years, also as an ecologist and nature connection practitioner myself, in looking at how nature's wisdom, nature's patterns and principles, living systems informed approaches can inform community-led action and transition groups particularly. And so this led me to really diving deep into the bioregioning movement and into biomimicry, particularly systems level biomimicry. And if those terms are unfamiliar to you, we're going to find out lots more about them today. Because we have some really wonderful people who are very experienced in these approaches and fields who are going to be telling us about it and available to answer our questions. So one thing that's important to know is that very unfortunately, Joe Brewer, who is going to be joining us today, his whole family have come down with a nasty virus, and at the last minute he couldn't join us. But very excitingly, Christian Wahl has very kindly and generously agreed to join us, and he is another leading light in the bioregioning movement and the author of the book Designing Regenerative Cultures. Many of us will be familiar with his work. He's also very involved in a place-based project in Mallorca where he lives, and hopefully we'll be hearing something about that today. We'll be speaking with Daniel first because he needs to jump off onto another call about halfway through our session together. So we'll hand over to him in a moment. After that, we're going to be hearing from Jess Berliner, who is joining us from Learn Biomimicry in South Africa. Hi, Jess. And I was very fortunate to learn alongside Jess in their wonderful practitioner educators course. I did the biomimicry educators course, and they also have a wonderful biomimicry practitioners course, and she's going to be telling us all about how we can learn from and emulate nature. And then we're going to hear from Asha Singhal from the Biomimicry Institute, which is a fantastic organization promoting and supporting biomimicry all around the world. And she is going to be talking to us about systems level biomimicry and how learning from and emulating and designing with and as nature can help us transform whole systems. And hopefully we will be weaving these fields together a little bit as well and applying them to your good selves and how you can use these in your places and communities and initiatives. So I think that's everything I wanted to say. Without further ado, I will hand over to Daniel and pose the questions to him. Can you tell us what bioregioning is? Can you tell us how it relates with nature's principles and practices, and also tell us a bit about what you've been doing with it and how it might help other place-based projects? Over to you, Daniel. Thank you.
First of all, hello everybody, and thanks for the last-minute invitation. I'm glad I could make the time because it's a really fascinating provocation to bring those two fields together, and it just seems appropriate that I get to have a chat about this because one of my mentors, John Todd, who founded the New Alchemy Institute in 1969, he was a fish biologist doing research on how certain fish were starting to not be able to sexually differentiate even back then in the late 1960s because of the environmental pollutants that we were putting into our rivers. And him and a bunch of other scientists created an institute called the New Alchemy Institute. And hold on a sec, I'll put something in the chat for you. This is an article that I wrote about that institute. And in it, if you look, there are the principles of the New Alchemy Institute. And one of them is to organize bioregionally. And if you asked Janine Benyus who helped her most in creating the life's principles for the book Biomimicry, you'd probably get the same name, John Todd, because John, with his early work in the percepts of biologically inspired design, as he called them, really pioneered what later by the Biomimicry Institute was reframed and popularized under life's principles. So there's a beautiful connection here, and the connection to the bioregional thought it goes deeper than that. For example, I saw somebody from Devon is online. The Bioregional Learning Center. If you look on their website, they very much refer to a paper by Donella Meadows, the system scientist. So that's lead over to Asha later. Donella who is really one of the leading lights and systems, applied systems practice, founded together with a bunch of people a group called the Balaton Group. And they met at Lake Balaton in Hungary, I think it is, or Romania, Hungary. And that's why it's called the Balaton Group. But John Todd was a member of that, and Donella was a member of that. And on the website of the Bioregional Learning Center, they actually refer to this particular kind of statement of the Balaton Group that was suggesting that if we want to shift human relationship to a living planet in the time available, we would need to create regional learning centers that would help people reintegrate human patterns into life's regenerative patterns at the bioregional scale. And to my mind, the notion of bioregioning is as ancient as our species. We have been regenerative expressions of place, custodians, stewards of place in every corner of the earth that was populated by the early humans. Pretty much every indigenous culture on the planet has an organizing system of cultural relationship to place that creates bioregional patterns. If you look, I can share that later. Like I have a wonderful conversation on the podcast series that I do with RSA Oceania called Regeneration Rising, where I'm talking to Tyson Young Caporta about the organizing patterns of regional tribes across Australia pre-Cook. And again, we have a bioregional pattern. So you could say that bioregioning is our species' long-term survival pattern. And it is precisely the pattern by which we as nature, like we as part of the living fabric, have a certain way of fitting into that wider nested wholeness that we emerge from. And that fitting in is at the local and regional scale. And that's where transition started with the local scale. I've worked a lot with eco-villages for many years. And the community local scale is where people have a face, people have a name, and most of the action lies. But it needs to be integrated into the biophysical reality of the region that these communities are nested in. And the concept of a bioregion, coming back to like the history behind bioregion, as in North America, there was a real upsurge of this concept of bioregionalism in the late 1960s, early 1970s, well, really in the 1970s, with the Planet Drum Foundation, people like Peter Berg and Raymond Desmond, and the North American Bioregional Congress. And it's that lineage that Joe is very much working in. But if we go a little bit deeper into the history of bioregionalism, we can see that people like Sir Patrick Geddes in Scotland, developing the valley section, he was a biologist who ended up becoming the founding father for the discipline of town planning, and very much a biomimetic way of designing. He learned how to work with humans as agents within the cities to bring the cities back to life. He had all sorts of really innovative ways of civic education to bring people back into relationship to place. He even invented something called the Outlook Tower, which you can still go and visit in Edinburgh on the Royal Mile near the castle. And it was a museum where you would walk into the ground floor and you'd have an exhibition of things around the world. Then you'd go the next floor up and you'd be in Europe. And then you'd go the next floor up and you'd be in Britain. And the next floor up, you'd be in Scotland. And then on the top floor was a camera obscura, which back 120 years ago was high tech, which allowed people to just look at the ceiling and basically see an image of the entire city of Edinburgh projected onto the ceiling. And so in just one journey through the tower, it actually made people 120 years ago understand how their region and their place were nested. And So yeah, I think that the reason why it's wonderful that you put those two terms together is that they're fundamentally linked. If biomimicry is about natural patterns and natural processes and natural forms and how they come about and why they're and how they fit in, how they're relational, then bioregioning is the practice of fitting into place and being custodians of place. I very often use Janine's wonderful one-liner, creating conditions conducive to life, to define what regeneration is really all about. Life is a planetary process that creates conditions conducive to life. And regeneration happens in every cell, every organ, every individual, every family, every community, every bioregion, and at the planetary scale. And what we're doing as we're being regenerative, as we're continuously learning and participating in this nested wholeness that we emerge from, which is life itself, we need to learn how to work with uncertainty. And that can only really happen at a local regional scale. Because if we try to deal with problems at the global scale, our solutions are going to create more problems. But if we deal with them at the local and regional scale, the patterns that we create have immediate feedback, and we can constantly learn of how to better fit in, how to be better custodians, how to make the system more abundant and more bioproductive. And it's our, like, if you want to have a kind of more academic proof of that our species has the capacity to be regenerative, look at Lila June's wonderful work that she did for her PhD a couple of years ago, Architects of Abundance. Lila June, you can find it online. And she basically put together all the North American examples and some South American examples of how indigenous native land stewards were basically creating the bioproductive ecosystems we now call wild Amazonia or the Pacific Northwest. The tree compositions, the soil compositions, all of them actually clearly show that they have been gardened by students of life who never, like one of the linguistic traps that biomimicry is often stuck in is the learning from life. And how do we design learning from? Because the preposition from makes life an other. And for me, what bioregioning is about, how do we constantly with the limit of our knowing, try to be good stewards of the living process we emerge from to design as life. It's a subtle but very fundamental shift. And I know that Janine and everybody in biomimicry understands that and designs as life, but I just want to highlight it because it's so interesting how we even just with using certain mimetic framing and language, Joe would have probably talked about that. We position people to think about something in one way or another. And so for me, in a nutshell, where it all comes together is bioregioning is the human pattern of people who have learned to design as life, to fit their patterns into the biocultural uniqueness of place of their bioregion, and maybe finishing that definition that I wanted to go to earlier of what a bioregion is. A bioregion is both a biogeophysical terrain, so a terrain that is defined not by human sociopolitical boundaries like the maps we see when we look at counties or nation states, but it's defined by ridge lines, by topography, by watersheds, by soil series, by geology that shape that region. It's defined by the story of place. And that story of place is both the more than human and geotectonic and climatic patterns shaping that place, but it's also again humans as nature in nature shaping how that region reflects upon itself through the human participation. So this Peter Berg always said that it's both a biogeophysical terrain and a terrain of consciousness. And in many ways, the terrain of consciousness is the powerful one. in this case, like the biogeophysical gives us the limits and boundaries and opportunities of our designs, but the terrain of consciousness is really what binds us into values and into how do we participate in this nested complexity in a way that nurtures life and creates conditions conducive to life. Right, that was my wrap.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I know I've got one immediate question and then I'll pass it over to our participants here. Would you say a little bit, you're a good friend to the transition movement, and I know you've been, aware and involved with transition and community-led change making for a long time. If someone's involved in a transition initiative or a transition hub, how would they start going about working at a more bioregional level? Like, what would that actually look like in maybe the first few months if they're not doing so already?
Well, exactly. If they're not doing so already, I think
Yeah.
most transition initiatives are doing so very much, and
So
probably
maybe sort of say a little bit about what people are already doing that would
yeah.
count as bioregioning
So,
as well, then, just in case they haven't thought of it that way.
so for example, one story that Rob was very instrumental in, I think, inspiring, was in the city of Liège in is it France or Belgium? I always get those two. Anyway,
Belgium.
Belgium. Thank you. And the city of Liège, where they created this centre alimentaire or something it's called. Like it's basically a food belt around the city that somewhat catalyzed also by COVID, um, created a real surge of activity where new food co-ops, consumer co-ops, and producer co-ops were being started and linking urban consumers to producers in the food belt around the city of Liège, and that is already. Geddes was 100, when was it, 15 years ago, in 1910 he wrote a book Cities and Evolution, in which he drew the valley section, which was that a city had to be planned from the mountains to the sea and along the waterway in its watershed, basically. And he proposed that planning needed to have this story of place done. So we need, like he was talking, we need a map of geology, fauna, flora, infrastructure, roads, resources, and then we can see what can be developed where and where it would fit. That method was later developed by Ian McHarg into what is now the GIS system. And so basically for anybody who's working locally, you already will have experienced that with certain things you have to breathe out a little bit, and from your, like if you start as a village initiative somewhere, we are now a transition town, when you look at water, energy, transport, it will look at it in a regional context, and so you're already putting your community in relationship to the proximate whole, if you want to use regenerative terms, which is the region that your city is nested in. And then what this regional opportunity does, just like transition towns globally gave this wonderful opportunity for like-minded people in communities everywhere to feel not like the weirdos in their place, but the pioneers in their place, because they could see that there were hundreds and maybe even thousands at some point of initiatives around the world that were also defining themselves as a transition town. And I think what we're currently seeing is that just like the eco-village movement had to learn that the community scale is vitally important but not enough, I think the transition town movement is now learning, and I'm not saying that most people didn't have it already, like, but more explicitly in the communication, learning that you really need to have transition towns in a regional context. And what that it does is it brings the same network effect closer to home again, because it would invite you to think more about what are the most proximate transition initiatives in our area, and then are they still in our bioregion or are they not? Are they and to actually begin to really work with the regional network. And if you look at the wonderful website of the Bioregional Learning Center, Isabel Kalil was actually very involved in transition at the earlier stage of it. Um, there's a series of steps that they say are part of the bioregional process, and basically all of them are about things like making the systems more visible to each other, creating a regional story, weaving a new narrative between activities that are already going on that are regenerative in place, that that are somewhat disparate at the moment because people have sort of their focus and don't see that somebody caring for single mums in a region and somebody caring for teenagers who had trouble with the law and somebody caring for an endangered species in that region and the local permaculture group actually all have something in common. They are human expressions of life's regenerative impulse. And I think if we in transition groups everywhere begin to see ourselves as expressions of life's regenerative impulse, trying to heal our communities and our relationship to place. The whole re-regionalizing consumption on food, for example, or cooperatizing access to energy. Local energy co-ops, local food co-ops, all of those things are already part of the transition DNA, but they're also vital parts of the bioregioning movement.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I'm really glad that you said the same thing that you said to me when we spoke recently, Daniel, about really uplifting what's already happening in the area and creating those networks across your areas, because this is one of the things we noticed with the transition evaluation work we did in 2020 and 2021, is that there's so much incredible work happening, and the transition initiatives and transition hubs that have really managed to have a level of impact that they were feeling excited about and that had spread to different levels of scale, and were those that were linking up in that way, linking with different community groups, with municipalities, with businesses or academia, you know, or with local tribes in indigenous lands, and really working to look at that, yeah, how do we create this regenerative network, and recognizing all those people already doing it, as you said, so that everyday people doing things that they might not think of as regeneration or bioregioning are recognizing themselves as already part of what you said, life expressing its own regenerative potential. I think that's so beautiful, and I've been saying that to everyone ever since you said it to me 2 weeks ago, so thank you for saying that again.
So
So
let me just add
yes,
one little thing, because it's also the state of the bioregioning movement is at the moment that there are lots of different players. I'll put a bunch of them in the comments for people to have a look at. And while there is a natural human tendency, we briefly talked about this in our conversation, to have a very well prepared, well structured 12-step plan. Like, here are your principles, here are your 12 steps, this is how you do it in every place, everywhere. This can be useful, and some of the approaches in the field are offering that kind of this is the way. Um, but I also think it's really important to really foreground that regenerative cultures, that biomimicring of the living fabric of the places we're actually doing this in, um, needs diversity. And so it's actually really wonderful that there are all these different ways of languaging bioregioning and bioregionalism, because some people prefer bioregionalism. I think of my mentor, Satish Kumar at Schumacher College, once saying to me, every ism creates a schism. And it creates a sort of ism is sort of join my identity or join this identity. We're part of this movement. Are you one of us? Bioregioning is much more ancient. It's a fundamental pattern that is in our species birthright to be in right relationship with each other and with place. And so there's like Guy Education that you also worked with for many years, and who's also been very closely linked to the um, transition movement through May East, and now putting out a course on bioregioning, introducing all these different initiatives around the world. And so, yeah, celebrate the diversity. And in the transition movement, you have that diversity, and the importance is to really build bridges. Like, don't create a practice of othering through creating an in-group and an out-group around bioregioning. Um, the power is the shared place container, the relationship to territory. It is actually one of the possible platforms that we can build to get left-wing and right-wing, highly polarized arguments diffused and let people meet in a shared love and caring for place.
Thank you, Daniel. Yes, I remember someone else you were presenting with on a podcast talking about how in many places where she's been, and I'm really sorry that I forget her name right now, I will find the podcast at some point and share it. She was saying in places with very polarizing issues, caring for land and for nature and for green spaces and feeling part of that and feeling a sense of belonging is what brought communities together the most and enabled communities to design together even across quite big differences or schisms in the past. So I think that's a really hopeful thing for those of us in community-led action to hear and to hear evidence of. So I would love to give a few minutes for Daniel to answer some questions. He's got about 10 more minutes with us. So would anyone like to ask questions? I'm looking at the participant list. So if you put your actual virtual hand up, I'll be able to see you. Or Dan might be able to call on you too. And I'm not sure if there's anything in the chat. I can reopen the chat and see if there's anyone asking questions in the chat. Oh, we can all just take a breath and let all that wonderful information sink in. There's a whole host of fantastic resources in the chat as well. And we will find, oh, Daniel's putting some more in there right now, so that's brilliant. Okay, does anyone have their hand up or are we all just still absorbing all that information? I'm not seeing any hands right now. So what I might do is start passing over to our next panelist, Jess, to tell us a little bit about what biomimicry is, and then maybe we'll have some questions about how these two things hang together and can be used together. And I mean, as Daniel says, these are all different ways of expressing really the same thing, which is how we become contributors and sort of ecological citizens and good participants of our places and living systems again. And there's a few different pathways that we're outlining here that work beautifully together. So if no one has a question, I'm not seeing any questions.
It looks like Catalina has her hand up.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I couldn't see that. There we go. Catalina, go ahead, ask a question. Nice to see you.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for this speech. I'm very happy to hear you, Daniel. I'm from Chile. I'm a Spanish speaker. So I had some difficulties to understand Deborah, but I wanted to ask. I am from the central region of Chile, and I am participating on the transition movement over here, and I am always like asking about like food sovereignty, sovereignty alimentaria. Yes, because we are like we are exporting a lot of avocados and a lot of fruit and vegetables for the world, and like the 60% of the people who work on land food feed the people, but like the 40% go outside. And the priority over here is to sell outside the food. Sometimes we don't have food because we are exporting like a lot of food. So I want to ask for some maybe like ideas or projects or initiatives around food sovereignty, sorry, to work in a bioregion like over here, you know, Mediterranean sector. Yes.
I think it's too much of the food system is in hands of large agro industry and global food giants. And it's that system that drives this crazy avocado business, for example. And in many places, it's already become very difficult to set up local farming cooperatives where you bring back a local food system. And the way that, I mean, in Europe, that example I mentioned earlier with the city of Liège is really an example of that. And I think in its own way, you could explore whether that's also possible in Chile. Like the concept is, can you find enough consumers that have enough of a stable economic situation and know that they spend X per week anyway to have their food, that they say, okay, rather than supporting the global supermarkets that are destroying our community and are making us go hungry in order to meet export targets, I'm going to put whatever little money I have towards supporting this cooperative at the local scale that is growing food in the region for the region. And ideally, if you can get some local businesses and some more, like some people that have more financial wherewithal to support this, like there's currently, for example, in the Netherlands, there's a big movement where within a regional context, maybe 200 families come together and they look at what of their food consumption could be produced locally in a more nutritious, more kilometro zero kind of way. And then they decide in order to produce the kind of food that these 200 families need, we need a farm of this size. And they put their money together and they buy a farm and they hire or support a young family of agriculturalists to use that farm as part of, to become part of the cooperative. And so some people put some money into the cooperative either to buy the land and then they get produce, or they pay a monthly fee. It's always the concept of community supported agriculture, not veg box, in the sense that the difference there is that you pay before the harvest. You pay to have a share of the harvest, and therefore you also pay the risk of farming as a collective. You don't, if there's been a hailstorm, say, oh, where's my food? You share the damage of the hailstorm also as a community. And the last bit, to not make it too long of an answer, those kind of initiatives are more resilient if you set them up in a wider region, in such a way that you have multiple farms that can then support each other. So if there's harvest failure in one, the community doesn't go hungry because they're actually partnering with neighboring ones and they support each other. It's a way of, like, food is a wonderful entry point for community organizing and community, not just food sovereignty, but also bioregional governance.
Thank you. Great question, Catalina, and very helpful answer. Thank you, Daniel. And we'll have one more question from our lovely transition colleague, Philippa, who I know is a good friend of Daniel's. And then we will pass over to our...
Oh my God, Daniel. So nice to see you. I'm super happy.
I don't know what you've done
I'm
to me, but
super...
I every time I read your name or now I see you, I have to think of pastel de nata.
Yes, that's my trump.
He makes the best pastel de nata in the world.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. My colleagues, some of my colleagues didn't try it yet. They will, though. I don't have a question, just to share with you. I hope that I can contribute to that question that just Catalina. Daniel, there is something that we had in the transition movement. In the beginning, Transition Network had a project that was the blueprint, and we left it a little bit aside. But in my transition initiative on the ground, that was Porto Alegre in Portugal, we worked bioregionally with the blueprint. And the blueprint, it could be used still, revived. And the blueprint was really looking at the region and choosing 5 pillars, 5 areas in which we could study in the region, for example, food, and do like an analysis of what stays in, what goes away, how could we change things and work in certain areas to improve the localization. And it was about region. So this is one of the things that I wanted to share with you.
Is that available? Is that available? Can anybody?
It should be available. I could go and look for it, but I would need to look for it.
I was just today, for the last 6 months, I've been working with Bill Sharp, the initiator of the Three Horizon framework.
Yeah, I know him very well. He trained me as well.
On developing the Three Horizons and this other tool that we've sort of co-developed called the Regenerative Lens into a bioregional application. And we were just today thinking about when we do what we call the actor pattern mapping at a regional scale, what are the bioregional content, like themes that we to focus it the
Yeah.
conversation around the bioregion. So I'd be really interested in what 5 categories you decided on, because we were with that question today, and I think it would be really powerful to unearth that material and put it.
Yeah. Okay. See, this was it was part of the Reconomy project as well. So I will look for it. That is one thing. And then to tell you that some initiatives on the ground, if you want some, for you, all of you know, there are initiatives on the ground in Portugal, for example, that are really going against the institutional border and doing work together and looking at the areas that they would like to work together. For example, in education, this is happening. So schools in Spain, for example, the creation of alternative schools is extremely limited. So they are in the same region, Portugal and Spain, they are putting schools in the side of Portugal to support the other region. It's really interesting as well to, in being in one region, identity and watershed, all those things, but as well looking how institutionally we can support each other. It's really interesting, and I'm aware as well about the planning in the Centre Alimentaire. I'm really glad that you mentioned it. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing up the institutions, because there's so much work bubbling up at the moment in this bioregional field. Just last week, Sarah Keblatin from the Philippines, as a lead author, supported by a whole bunch of people in the bioregioning field, but particularly by Erika Zarate and Oscar Guzniev from Resilience Earth in Catalonia. They created a bioregional governance guide and bioregional training for Southeast Asian communities, in which they unearthed that many of the community indigenous organizing patterns were bioregional anyway. Surprise, surprise. Coming back to the beginning, it's our species pattern of inhabiting place. And it's a wonderful resource. Again, super useful to transition initiatives around the place, because it actually has a kind of step-by-step session facilitation guide. I'll put it in the chat in a second.
Yes.
But then there's also all this work in different guises, working around, like Samantha Powers wrote this. Initially, it was going to be a white paper, then it ended up being a book on bioregional finance facilities. And how do we actually, what are the institutions that are needed to bring finance flows back into bioregional scale transformation? And then in that context, there are lots of people working on organizations like intergenerational land trusts, and ways of creating bioregional commons pools again, where you could put land into a bioregional commons and then create a cooperatively managed stewardship system that would allow access to that land. So there's so much really exciting stuff going on in parallel. Like one of the things that I've put in the chat is the bioregional, but what are they called? Bioregional weaving labs of Ashoka. Yeah. I personally don't find the kind of change maker DNA of Ashoka very helpful, but again, it's a wonderful approach, collecting a lot of really nice initiatives into a new narrative. They're indirectly or directly linked with Common Land, and Common Land's work with the 4 returns also offers a wonderful strategy. I put that in the chat as well, to rethink what you're doing in a transition network at the local scale in that regional context. And it's so exciting, Filipa, that and obvious, like it would have happened because the people that were involved think in that way, that you would have had this blueprint at the beginning. But it's a shame that it didn't get. I didn't know about that blueprint. It sounds really interesting work. So please send it to me.
I think you two need to carry on talking. So that's exciting. I'm glad that thank you for joining in, Felipa, and bringing some of what you've been doing locally in Portugal too. And thank you for all those excellent other examples, Daniel. I do want to bring in our other panelists at this point because I definitely find that biomimicry is a really wonderful way for us to very practically reconnect with and start learning from and designing as nature, as Daniel was saying. So I just want to really, really thank you, Daniel. I know you might have to sneak away in the next few minutes. That was super inspiring, very, very helpful. And I'm sure it will give lots for Jess and Asha to riff off as well in the second half of our session here together. I do wonder, do we want to have maybe just a minute's break to kind of let Daniel sneak away, let Jess and Asha get ready, and then if anyone needs to have a quick glass of water or a quick pee, then that's all. Just stretch your body a little bit or something like that. Let that good information settle, and Jess can get her slides all kind of ready and up to share. And we'll come back in just a few moments and keep diving into this wonderful exploration of how we can learn with nature and design as nature. Thank you. How are you doing, Jess? Do you want to try sharing your screen and see if your slides come up now? While people are just maybe having a little stretch or getting a glass of water or something.
You know, Debs, I have faith. I have faith that it's going to work. I'm also just doing my little dance of
shaking it out.
shaking it out, embodying the learnings. My goodness. Yeah, you know, just quietly reorganizing my whole talk in my mind. Casually.
Joy of panels. Once you've listened to one other person, there's all these other things you want to say or link to, or
so much, so many things. I wish I could just, you know, fractally dissipate my talk into all the little avenues I want to actually get into. But
yeah, well, let yourself roam around with it a bit if you want to. We've still got a good amount of time here together, 40 minutes or so. So we're going to hear from Jess now and then Asha afterwards, and have some more time to discuss and question. If people think of questions while Jess or Asha are talking and you think you might forget it, or you're just waiting for the right moment, pop it in the chat as well, because then we'll know that there's some good questions arising, and I can even, we'll find a natural pause to ask them. All right, so encouraging anyone to come back who's gone away from the screen, or to be somewhere where you can hear at least, and we will pass over to the lovely Jess and invite you to start your little talk.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I cannot see you because most of your cameras are off, but maybe, I don't know, can you do a digital wave or a camera off and an actual wave? Yes, humans. How exciting. Good to see you. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much for inviting me, Debs. It is such a pleasure. And it's quite nice to be outside of the biomimicry circles for a change. After a while, you kind of start to get to know everybody, and it feels like one big family reunion. And I'm guessing that's kind of how it feels here for everybody from the Bioregioning and Transition Network. I'm like, who are these people? This is so nice. So my name is Jess, otherwise Jessica if I'm in trouble, but otherwise just Jess is good. And I am the co-founder of Learn Biomimicry. And when Deb invited me to speak with you today here at this talk, oh my gosh, my mind ran off in all these different directions, because there's bioregioning, which is actually so similar to biomimicry. It's like the same fundamental principles, and I didn't want to be in the kind of preaching to the choir space. And then I thought, okay, I can make it really technical. And I was like, it's not too related. And so I've been zooming in and out all over the place. And what I came up with was seed pods. Because I am a nature nerd, actually, when it comes down to it, I don't know if any of you have seen a seed pod like this. How amazing is that? It's got these super cool little sails all over it. And so that is where I am actually going to start. And as soon as I can, I will share my screen with my presentation. So give me one moment. Let's get this to start. Alrighty, so you can see my screen, yes? Excellent, thank you. So what I just showed you was one seed pod, probably not the kind of seed pod that came to mind when I said seed pod, but nevertheless, here they are in all of their glory. Here's just a small sample of some of the seed pods that I have collected. Now, what I love about this is that they all actually have the same goal, from the plant's perspective at least, which is to protect and to distribute the genetic information of the plant, right? That's really all the seed pod is. But what we notice is that they have a beautiful diversity of designs. So we notice that the designs are diverse and well adapted to the context of that plant. Is it a watery context, a windy context, an animal-y context? Is the seed being planted there and then in that moment? Does it need to travel far away? Does it need to stay dormant for a long time? And we suddenly start to see that there is this magnificent ability for nature to create these designs that are adapted. And the next thing you know, you're seeing this everywhere, this exquisite adaptation that life has. And you're seeing the genius that surrounds you every day. You start to notice it not only in the flowers, not only in the seeds, not only in the leaves, not only in the little tiny weeny bits, but in whole ecosystems. You suddenly start to marvel at this ability that life has to design. And maybe you find yourself asking, what else is there that I hadn't actually noticed before? And you might realize when you start to ask that the ecosystem around you is managing water, it's building soil, it's creating habitat for diverse beings. It is cycling materials, it's exchanging value, it's doing all of these things all of the time. And when you realize this, you recognize that nature has the solutions for some of our biggest challenges. And in fact, she's been solving them quietly, elegantly, brilliantly, right under our noses, outside all the time, over eons. And when you realize this, you might ask, what else might I learn from nature? Not just about nature, but from it. Thanks, Daniel. There is something so special in that little paradigm shift of recognizing that we're not separate from nature, that we're not just learning about it. It's not just the cabinet of curiosities. It's not just this conquer and document, but actually we can be quiet and that we can learn. And this, my friend, is the aha moment. It is the shift of perspective that opens up a world of possibility. And when we quiet our cleverness, we start to experience awe and wonder. And guess what? As it turns out, awe and wonder have been scientifically proven to promote learning and curiosity, to enhance creativity, and to even change your perception of time. How cool is that? And by the way, as it turns out, your perception of time is actually a function of your heart and your heart rate and your brain speaking. So that's also pretty cool. So being in this state of awe and wonder and curiosity really gives us a new superpower. And so what do we do with all of these superpowers? Cue biomimicry. So at its most basic, biomimicry means bio means life, mimicry meaning to imitate. So really, it's the practice of imitating life, mimicking life. But in practice, it means learning from the genius of nature and translating these learnings into products and processes and systems that create conditions conducive to life. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, we might imagine, a thriving, bustling town or city. It's kind of got that green look going on because that's what we like to imagine of the future. But let's actually zoom in for a moment and think about all of that possibility. So what if our colorful fabrics could be non-toxic? Because if anybody spent any time actually doing any research into our textile world, it is horrifying. What if we could create non-toxic colors? What if our buildings were life-friendly and resource efficient? What if we weren't using hideous extractive techniques and chemistry that just destroys life and only has a singular function and needs tons of energy to produce anything else? And what if our built environment was a habitat for diverse species, not just one species? And so when we start to look to biomimicry, we start getting these amazing innovations and tools and solutions that are tapping into the genius of nature to start to address some of these huge challenges that we have. So for example, in the textile space, we've got Wearwool, who are producing amazing colors based on different kinds of corals and how they produce color using benign chemistry. We have Spintex being inspired by spiders and how they actually spin their silk and how they create phenomenal threads that can be woven into different kinds of textiles. We've got Sparkcell, who they use cellulose from plant fibers to actually produce color films that can be used on just about anything and that are adaptive. We've got Amphico, who are re-looking the way we make textiles from a single fiber woven in different ways that give it different properties and ultimately that make it far more recyclable. We've got all of these companies working in this space, figuring out how might we make our designs using ambient temperatures, low energy processes, life-friendly chemistry. And on the building side of things, we've got Blue Planet, who are creating cement that actually sequesters carbon. We've got Stowe using their Lotus Sand paint, which actually mimics beautiful leaves like these in my background. Woohoo! They actually use this micro-textured surface to actually keep things clean without needing higher energy cleaning processes. The dirt runs off with the rainwater. We've got Strong by Form, who are also using waste wood materials and actually recombining them in such a way inspired by trees, such that they can create these incredible load-bearing, beautiful structures that can be used internally for building design that use waste materials, far less material, and that are incredibly pleasing. And then, of course, we've got John Todd Ecological Design, which, again, so beautifully Daniel actually mentioned. So I don't need to go into too much depth about that. But looking at wetlands and how they actually function to not only clean water, but also to create value through all of these different life cycles. And these are just some examples of how we can get into the nitty-gritty of how we design things differently in such a way that we can create these conditions conducive to life. And what I really want to highlight is that, sometimes people have this notion of like, oh, I don't do biology. This is not for me. And biology is actually a very small percentage of biomimicry. Yes, it is very useful in first principles kind of biomimicry where we're doing research. On the other hand, we have the ability for people to actually understand and create these designs. We have engineers working together. We have business people working together. We have marketers working together. Biomimicry is a team sport. It is inherently transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. And I think what's so important is recognizing the fact that there is something for everybody in this space. And these are kind of really sitting on like the product and process level. And what happens when we start to look at the systems level and we start to figure out how is nature actually regenerative? How are we learning from the genius of this place? How are we creating conditions conducive to life? And then we start to look to amazing companies and work that's being done, such as Interface. And they have done, Interface is an amazing flooring company, basically. They started out with designing carpets, but then we really started to look at actually how can we start to change this, not just from using waste products, but actually how do they radically redesign all of their products so that they are, again, using up any waste. They're cycling the waste, they're using benign chemistry. But then this went further and further, not just into their products, but into their companies. And they started to figure out, what do the office spaces look like? What does the company culture look like? you know, how are we creating conditions conducive to life within our business, within the spaces that people live in, and the kind of ethics that they run within these spaces. And they started on this phenomenal journey that goes beyond, you know, mission zero, which was ultimately to reduce their carbon footprint, but into being regenerative. So thinking through the lens of factories as forests. What if our factory could function like a forest? And there is just this beautiful aspect of biomimicry that I think is quite often overlooked. We spend a lot of time thinking about it in the technical sense, but I strongly believe that biomimicry is really a mindset and a methodology. And what was really highlighted in the work with Interface was that continuous mindset of going, okay, so how do we not just do less bad, but how do we do better? How do we do more good? How do we become regenerative? It's the continuous asking of what if, what if, what if, how might we? And so there really is this mindset of how can we keep doing better? How can we keep learning from the genius around us? And there's something so beautiful when it comes to learning from an ecosystem, because you realize that it has been solving all of these challenges of toxicity, the challenges of resource efficiency, the challenges of moving, storing, cleaning water, building soil, creating habitats. And there really is an opportunity to change the way that we design things. So when it comes to biomimicry, there are so many different ways to kind of get into this. And one of the most beautiful resources and just starting points into this space is the Ask Nature website. I think Asha might be mentioning this later, I'm not sure, but otherwise just go to asknature.org. And this is the most phenomenal collection of biological strategies, of innovations, and where we really start to look at nature through the lens of function. Now, bear with me for one tiny weeny little technological moment, technical moment here. Not technological moment, that's not my strong suit. The biggest thing in biomimicry is learning how to ask questions differently. And we like to think through the sense of action. And so we like to think through verbs, and where that really comes out is functions. And so we don't ask what something is, we ask, what is it doing? And so if I have a problem, I'm not saying that I have a problem with a thing, I'm having a problem with an action, with a function. And so that becomes the bridge between biology and our human design. And so when we start to problem solve through the lens of function, we immediately start to kind of get into a really interesting solution space. And when we combine that with this deep tie to context, to place, to understand those parameters, we start to create solutions that are far more well adapted. There are all sorts of ways of using nature through the lens of measure to guide our sustainability challenges. But for now, we're not going to get into that in this talk, but just wanted to plant the seed that it's there. There are also so many different aspects of biomimicry. We have 3 different seeds of the emulate and the ethos and the reconnect. There are all of these different components that we can weave together. And I think I'm going to start into this, and then I realized like everybody in this group is already so aligned with the intentionality that biomimicry is trying to achieve. Everybody in this group is already so connected with place. And so I thought I'll just do a little pin drop into the kind of emulation that exists. But it really is a holistic practice and a multidisciplinary practice that allows us to create create designs that create conditions conducive to life. And ultimately, it is a holistic practice. So as I mentioned, it's not all about the emulation, although that's incredible, but it is more of an embodied practice of moving through these levels of powerful beliefs and visions towards a deliberate application of skills. And so when we actually start to learn from nature, when we start to think through our lens of function, when we start to quiet our cleverness, we really are welcoming you into a world of possibility. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jess. I really, really enjoyed that. And I would love to introduce Asha and have Asha speak about systems level biomimicry, and then we'll see what questions we have for both of you, if that's all right, just to make sure that we have time to hear from Asha as well. I'm very excited to have you both here. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Gorgeous slides as well. Asha, would you be so kind as to tell us a bit more about yourself? I know you work for the Biomimicry Institute. We've heard a little bit about the Ask Nature Hive, but tell us a bit about your position and the work that you're doing there, and about systems level biomimicry and how we can apply it.
Thank you so much, Deborah and Jess. That was amazing. I feel our presentations are so complementary. So this is going to be really exciting. So a little bit of a background. Hi, everyone, firstly. I'm Asha Singhal. I am the communications manager for the Nature of Fashion initiative at the Biomimicry Institute. Professionally, I'm an architect, designer, and I have something popping up here in terms of language. Never mind. And so, so professionally, I'm an architect, designer, biomimicry practitioner, and also a futurist. I also dabble in storytelling, which is why I'm doing this work. And I'm just really, really honored to be here. I remember I first came across Transition Network through the books by Rob Hopkins, I think in 2017, when I was first working on my thesis, which was entirely about how nature-inspired designs can guide our future. And the thesis was titled Hybrid Futures, focusing on the confluence of nature, emergent technologies, and radical imagination as its foundational pillars. Since then, I've honestly dedicated myself to bringing these futures to life. So one project at a time, and as Jess will tell you, sometimes multiple simultaneously all the time. So the topic of this panel is just such a beautiful thing, you know, it's such a beautiful confluence for me. And ever since I was invited to this by Deborah, I feel like, just like Jess, my mind has been zooming around topics. Like, what should I share? There are so many things I can talk about. So I will likely touch upon quite a few that have been on my mind, and with all of them having their North Star focused on how nature's genius can help us reimagine our human systems as resilient, regenerative, and deeply connected to life itself. So I'm just going to share my screen. Let's see if that works. Can you see the slides? Yeah, awesome. Thank you for the confirmation. I'm going to be juggling between screens as I talk to you, so we will see. So I just want to start with the question that what can nature teach us about designing systems that thrive? So just like Jess said, you know, nature doesn't just inspire products or processes, it offers solutions at every level. For example, mangroves are these incredible ecosystem engineers. Their roots filter and desalinate water while also stabilizing coastlines. Termite mounds that regulate temperature without needing any energy-intensive HVAC systems, unlike our human designs. Fungal networks that connect forests, sharing nutrients across vast distances. Nature doesn't just work in isolation. It teaches us how entire systems work together harmoniously and in connection. To understand this, let's just have a look at how nature manages change. And this is where we're going right back to Daniel's book, Designing Regenerative Cultures, because this is a model that I often refer to when thinking about change in nature. This is the adaptive cycle model. And it's a powerful natural model that showcases how systems evolve by passing through 4 different phases: growth, conservation, release, and reorganization. So change in nature is not linear, it's cyclical. So I'll try to use the examples of seasons in nature and how that relates to phases within the adaptive cycle. Let's start with the one at the bottom left corner, which is growth. So this reminds me of spring. So this is the phase where plants flourish and new life emerges, which moves on to conservation, which is the summer, which brings stability. This is where the energy becomes stored in mature ecosystems. Then that leads to release. This is like autumn that signals decomposition, leaves fall, nutrients return to the soil. And that leads us to reorganization, which is reflected by winter, that prepares the ground for renewal. And this is where new patterns emerge from old structures. And that leads us right back to growth. So human systems often resist these cycles, clinging to endless growth and stability, getting stuck in the conservation stage. While what is often needed is the regular release to be able to adapt to the new conditions. Nature shows us that resilience comes from embracing release and renewal. And then this model here is called panarchy, which is a model of nested set of adaptive renewable cycles. It captures the dynamics of ecosystem development across scales. So change doesn't happen in isolation, it's interconnected across scales, local, regional, global, and panarchy builds on the adaptive cycle by showing how small cycles influence larger systems and vice versa. So take a forest ecosystem, for example. Decomposing leaf feeds the soil, which supports tree growth, and which sustains wildlife populations, all nested within larger global climate patterns as well. So to truly drive change across industries, how might we start connecting our human solutions across scales from communities to global industries? That's one of the things that we're aiming for with the Nature of Fashion initiative at the Biomimicry Institute. Our current fashion industry is, as Jess also mentioned, it's a very textile industry, fashion industry, they're very, very complex. And our current fashion industry operates on a linear take, make, waste model, producing about 92 million tons of waste annually. It's a rough equivalent of a rubbish truck full of clothes ending up in landfills every second. So just think about the volumes that we're talking about here. In contrast, nature operates cyclically. So waste of any kind becomes food for new growth. In 2020, we asked the question in our report, what would the fashion industry look like if it acted like a natural ecosystem? The answer was decomposition. Decomposition is the missing piece, the missing engine of circularity. The Nature of Fashion initiative focuses on the bottom fraction of mixed textile waste. This is the waste that goes either to dump sites, landfills, incineration, and really starting to rethink about waste as a valuable resource rather than an end product. So what we're seeking to do is support the transition from a linear model of take, make, waste, and in the fashion and textile industry to a cyclical model where we can break down to build up new. With this initiative, we are partnering with pilot partners across the globe, and we are piloting solutions that are locally attuned and responsive to their local and regional needs. So we have our pilot partners in the Netherlands, Circle Economy, who are focusing on diverting mixed textile waste from incineration, using industrial symbiosis, where waste for one industry becomes raw material for another. In Ghana, we have the Ore Foundation, who are looking at using a plastic-eating bacteria, which was discovered in the Korle Lagoon, to decompose fibers. And in Germany, we have Beneficial Design Institute, who are testing local waste recovery pathways for biocompatibility, for understanding how we can take it back into Earth's natural cycles. The mission sounds very simple as I say it, but it is incredibly lofty. To be able to convert these massive volumes of textile waste, unwanted waste, into materials that can either reintegrate into Earth's natural cycles or become food for another industry. So this is one of the initiatives that we're working on at the Biomimicry Institute. And at the Biomimicry Institute overall, we exist to create a nature-positive, inclusive, and regenerative world inspired by nature's genius. We focus on addressing three main challenges: climate change and biodiversity loss, as you can see right at the bottom here, disconnection from nature, and looking at the harmful impacts of take, make, waste model and how we can begin to start changing that. To do this, we have various programs ongoing at the Biomimicry Institute. So for example, we have the Ask Nature platform that Jess shared, and I will talk about it in a bit as well. We have the Ask Nature Hive, which is a community platform. We have collabs, we have the Ray of Hope Accelerator, and the Nature of Fashion initiative as well. So Ask Nature. This is an online database available at asknature.org. I'm really glad we already have that link in the chat. It's a place where we have more than 1,800 biological strategies for innovation. So when you're trying to look at how does nature create resource efficient structures, how does nature create structural color? So when you're able to identify those functions, like what is it that we want to do, that's a place where you can really start to find answers. And you can access it directly on the website. And anytime you need any support around that, please feel free to reach out. Then we have the Ask Nature Hive, which is an online community where we hold webinars. It's also a learning platform. We host the collabs there, which are going to start later this year, and also nature immersions in your own local areas. So we have speaker series, book groups, challenges, movies. These are all there to support the reconnection, emulate, and the ethos elements. So anything that you want to dive into, this is a place where people can start doing it in community with each other, with the support, and to be able to connect across scales and across regions, across the globe. And then we also have the Biomimicry Toolbox, which provides step-by-step guidance through biomimetic design processes. So please feel free to reach out if you would like to get to know more about any of these. They're all available, and I will add some links shortly as well. So now, just to bring us full circle, because I've touched on quite a few topics, I just want to wrap this up for us so we can get into the discussion as well. One of the things I think about quite a bit is, like, as we strive to create a world that honors life's wisdoms, nature really teaches about resilience that comes from diversity and connection and collaboration. Transitioning in so many ways requires us to act not just as individuals, but as collaborators within the larger systems. Within the ecosystems that we live in, what can we learn from those? What can we learn from our neighbors about being in this place, about being where we are? And some of them have been there for millions of years, for such a long time, so much longer than any of us. So what can we learn from them? What are they here to teach us? And what can we build with them in this space? As Daniel quoted Janine, and so did Jess, right at the beginning, I'm going to do the same. And we know that life creates conditions conducive to life. So how can we start to do the same? And that's where I'll wrap up. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much, Asha. That was really inspiring and very beautiful. You guys just have all the best slides as well. I'm very grateful to you for talking to us about the systems level biomimicry and giving the fashion example. We have a local fashion project in our transition group actually trying to do something similar at a very small local level, which I've put in a link to. And I also wanted to highlight something that I put in the chat, which is the work of Maybrit Pedersen-Zari, who has really looked at systems level biomimicry in towns, cities, urban regions, and how we can actually look at becoming, really positive contributors within our local urban settlements as well. How can our urban settlements become a kind of contributing part of our ecosystems, and how can we transition our towns and cities to being genuinely, producing clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat, soil renewal, and all these sorts of things in urban settlements. So that feels to me like very practical pathways that transitioners can look into, and that research, I've shared some of the papers that are freely available online, and really recommend looking at her work. So all very exciting stuff. We've had one question that's slightly more in relation to bioregioning than biomimicry, but I'll put it out there in case anyone does want to have a go at it, which is, how well can our local places meet our material needs? We import a lot at the moment. We have quite dense populations in some places. I don't know if either of you want to have a go at that. It might have been a better question for Daniel, but do we feel like we can learn enough about our places and maybe learn how to, maybe it requires us to learn how to change how we do things as well in order to meet our material needs from our places more? Would you like to have a go at that, or shall I see if there are some more biomimicry specific questions available?
No, happy to. Absolutely. I think it's a very good and a very interesting question, because I think as global population dynamics are changing, we are so deeply centralized in cities sometimes, which are very, very dense. And then we have places where there are very few people. So it's very unlike, in some ways, a very distributed way of looking at things. And that's where I think globalization is supportive. Like, we can have materials from different places. But then on the other hand, I think it's important to remember that how do we, like, I perhaps don't have an answer as such, but maybe more of a philosophical question attached to this. Like, how do we balance the idea of the fact that technology is changing and globalization is continuing to grow? It will. That's how it's going to continue. So how do we take that into account as we also look at bioregioning practices? So as we learn more about our place, what is available, what can be self-sufficient, and what might be needed. So how can we almost like get most of our needs fulfilled using the things that are around us, and use those extras as those special elements, just like in the periodic table, we use very few, nature uses very few select elements to build most of the things. And then there are some which are kind of part of how we build things, but not everything, and not used in the way that we're doing it. So perhaps, again, that's more of a question, a counter question to that. Jess, would you like to add something?
That gives me an idea. I'll pass over to you in a minute, Jess. But one of the things that I had it really clearly then for a second, then it went. Yes, one of the things you're pointing to is life's principles, right? So I really recommend everyone check out the Life's Principles design lens from the Biomimicry Institute. Maybe we can put a link to that too. And one of life's principles is use locally abundant and available materials. So we can try and meet as many of our needs as possible using locally abundant and available materials, looking for local green building materials like we've done for where I live, looking for food sources that are abundant and available. And then as Asha says, there may always be some things in smaller quantities that are very specific that we need international trade or we need to be developed in other places for. But yeah, we can certainly learn from nature also how to be more distributed in our resources, right? And in meeting our material needs, we can have distributed ways of creating energy, distributed ways of creating food, so that we have lots of redundancy and diversity built in, which means if one food chain or one factory or one, kind of supply chain becomes unavailable, there are lots and lots of other ways that we've got micro energy producing, micro food producing, micro fashion producing. It's like we need all that diversity and small scale stuff built in. So we have a diversity of ways to meet our needs rather than these very big centralized and then quite fragile systems, right? So there you go. You helped me actually think of an answer as well. But Jess, over to you. And we will pass to Dan fairly soon, because sadly we do have to wrap up fairly soon and let the next session get going.
How exciting. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Debs, and Asha as well, for those beautiful answers. Doesn't leave me with an enormous amount to contribute to this, but what I would say is that I think there's also an opportunity to, if there isn't already one, do an incredible systems mapping of the available resources. One of our alumni as well, from back in the day, Rana Hajirasuli, she started a company called The Surplus, which basically was sort of the backbone for an industrial symbiosis network, but basically it's become an amazing platform whereby people can actually put forward, what they have surplus of, and what they're looking for, and also, sort of an ask and give situation. But it's been really amazing because it started out with the notion of it being just, really around an industrial ecology, from really hardcore industry perspectives, but it actually became an amazing resource in times of need as well, being able to kind of, there is a storm, quickly using this platform to be able to share. So I think shortening the feedback loops of what is actually available is always very, very helpful. Again, thinking in functions in terms of does it specifically need to be a desk, or can it be something that something can rest on? Does it need to be you know, this particular food, or can it be a particular food that provides that nutritional content? And so really, again, you know, just shifting that lens in terms of like, what is the function we're actually trying to fulfill can open up, I think, new opportunities. And yeah, I mean, it's all very well and good to have these sort of theoretical, wonderful, abstract academic concepts, but, you know, in practice, I think it does take a long time for a system to stabilize, and then also to find its way to being adaptive. So where do they need to be long feedback loops and short feedback loops? Yeah, so it's a process, but I think connections and functions help.
Dan tells us we can have a little bit of spillover time, which is very nice because there's a bit of a break between this and the next session. And Cuckoo in Colombia, who's a very dedicated transitioner involved in lots of the Abya Yala transition initiatives and community over there, asks, how do you see the dialogue between natural intelligence and the wave of technocratic projection and artificial intelligence? Like, because, and then she goes on to say, because this development is continuing to strongly impact our human and natural communities due to implementation and extractive development that supports kind of technological advancement. So yeah, how can, one of the things I've heard said in solar punk particularly is a kind of future where tech is used only in life affirming ways, which feels very resonant with the life creating the conditions for life to thrive kind of idea. Where do you guys sit on the whole kind of like learning from nature and then tech and AI and, you know, appropriate use of all these tools that are becoming available? Big question, but
Do you want to go first, Jess? Okay.
Go for it.
I feel it kind of, for me, it goes back to what Daniel was saying as well earlier. Like, we seem to have separated ourselves from nature. So anything that we're creating, we almost think about it as separate. And one of the things that I've thought about quite a bit is how there's almost like a separation wounding that exists when we bifurcated in some ways. Our ways became so different. And then at the same time, the way that we're going, it has its limits. It has deep, deep limits as to the way we can go, and it's not going to last very long. So how do we bring that back? How do we go back to that part? How do we start to heal that separation? And how do we bring our technologies to work in a way that actually is life affirming and supporting natural processes, our bodies, and not creating waste and pollution in a way that is so severely damaging to absolutely everything. We're breathing microplastics. They're in our clouds, they're in our soil, they're everywhere. And in so many ways, with artificial intelligence, the amount of consumption of energy that's happening at the moment, like how far can that grow? So how do we bring it back? Like, it might be supportive to us, it is supporting us in ways. Then how do we find regenerative ways to be able to use those technologies? And I think personally, I believe that ethics of AI need to be considered a lot more before we keep advancing this field. I think there are a lot of amazing authors who are writing around this. I feel James Bertle has written a lot in Ways of Being. That's an incredible book that I'd recommend around this topic as well. But I'll pass it over to Jess.
Gosh, yeah. I think that there are so many different layers, and it depends on, you know, who we're conversing with and what their perspectives are. Because as Asha says, you know, we have this deep disconnection. I think a lot of people in this particular room have a very close connection with nature. There are a lot of people that have, you know, an enormous disconnection from nature. And I think so a lot of it comes into actually reconnection. A lot of the way that we actually, Deb, I'm seeing fingers. Is that a yes fingers or is that time fingers? That's yes fingers. Okay.
no, I'm a big fan of nature connection.
Cool. Yeah, I think, you know, like I was speaking about as well before, when you can actually be in nature and when you realize the genius that actually surrounds you, when you realize that you're part of the system, when you feel that humility, there is so much, there's such a vast change in the way that we think about things and the way that we think about how things can be. And I think a lot of the time people kind of have this notion that like, oh, we can't design something like that. I'm like, do you realize right now I'm sitting at my home in Cape Town talking to a computer that's sending a message via the modem, via satellite to another part of the world. So you can hear this in real time. Like, there is technological possibility. We can do pretty much anything that we prioritize as a species. And so for me, there's a lot of shifting in the prioritization space, which comes into that policy, it comes into the funding. And I think that this is why it's so important that we bring in business, policy, economics, all of these hard conversations and, crossing those bridges and finding the recognition that like, oh, perhaps there is a triple bottom line and not just a bottom line. And, a lot of funding needs to go into the development of technologies that are more life friendly. And so I think, at the superficial level, we could say, right now, how do we design supercomputers and data centers that do not have such a dreadful environmental impact? As a first step, it's going like, okay, how do we design ourselves into mitigating our impact? But concurrently, we need to be reimagining systems such that we don't necessarily need that. And, if we're using gigatons of liters of water a day to design cat pictures, oh my gosh, what are we doing? And so, there's a lot, but I think it's an ongoing conversation that happens at different levels. And it is so critical to feed both the wonder of the places that we're trashing, really bringing that connection. I think it's feeding the vision of what is actually possible. And it's also figuring out how do we fund the development of not only do less bad, but do more good.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, and I would just love to say in wrapping up that I feel, the reason I love biomimicry and bioregioning so much is because both of them are practical ways that invite us to fall in love with the living world that we are part of again, and to really remember our roles as contributors, participants, that we can be keystone species in our communities, that we can contribute positively, and that, as you say, we have the imagination, as Rob Hopkins would say, we have the creativity, and we also have technological tools, and all we need is that perspective, that will, that ecological worldview, and we can turn our amazing creativity in collaboration with the rest of the living world to finding and implementing these solutions. And I really do feel like this is our biggest chance of navigating this terrible polycrisis we're in. And I passionately believe that transition is part of that, that by centering nature-centric approaches and by being expressions of living systems in our places, that we can be part of this big transition, and that we are such good allies with your movements and with your bodies of work. So thank you so much for being here, for sharing the things that you've been doing, sharing your wisdom. And yeah, we're actually applying for funding at the moment to do more of this work and to bring more of these networks together, working with the Biomimicry Institute and Permaculture Association and Global Eco-Village Network. And we very much hope we'll be able to do a lot more of this kind of thing in the future. So thank you so much.